I would personally think that sometimes the most success is had by sharing ideas and collectively, right? You find the right people, and when you find that right group of people, you become kind of co-mentors to each other, right? And it's just a win-win on both sides.
Welcome to The Path to Wealth, the show about well-being, fulfillment, and financial freedom. And I'm your host, Hannes Hennche. Welcome to a new episode of The Path to Wealth. I'm your host, Hannes Hennche. Today our guest is Carlo Piccirillo, Managing Director of Manas Equities, an asset management company. And Carlo has successfully transformed from a W-2 employee to a thriving entrepreneur and investor after the pandemic. He'll be sharing insights into his mindset and the strategies that have helped him start syndicating and building a diverse property portfolio, including his ventures into self-storage market. And what we just spoke about, the brave man that walked into rent stabilized in properties in New
Sure.
York. So welcome to the show, Carlo.
Thank you for having me, Hannes.
Good. So what gave you the brave heart to go into rent stabilized New York apartments?
I was, I guess, born into it. My parents immigrated here from Southern Europe, and they were both blue collar workers. My father was an iron worker. My mom was a cleaning lady. And at that time, their mentality was to work hard, and they worked second jobs, save their money, and they bought a small rent stabilized property, which is where I was born and where I was raised. And as a kid, my job changed from sweeping floors and mopping the floor to helping my dad upgrade units to the actual paperwork. And I always saw the value in that. So I started investing in rent stabilized as well, and later on. And then I have now two partners that they were also heavily invested in rent stabilized. So we grew into it. We knew it, So I think that there was a unique aspect in which we understood the asset class. But that market's been changing as it has been over the course of time. But with the new laws that changed in 2019, we've seen a drastic shift in owning rent stabilized properties. And we're seeing buildings that are now being sold that never hit the market. They were owned for 40, 50, 60 years. Just people looking to exit either New York or exit this asset class. So
Mhm.
it has been challenging. We are been looking to diversify as well, and partly because of the challenges in rent stabilized properties. But we can't predict the future. I think a lot of it is impacted by the political landscape in New York, which is not necessarily reflective of the real situations and issues that both tenants and landlords both face in New York.
Mhm. You just gave I was born into a whole new definition, like literally born into.
Yeah,
But
it's the rent stabilized. It's unfortunate that there's so many political impacts to it, and I think for political gains, unfortunately, it's an important asset class, right? Because it provides affordable housing for a lot of New Yorkers. I've seen the change. I grew up in Queens, and I grew up in a very blue collar, first generation and immigrant neighborhood, and you know most of the people that I went to school with and I grew up with, they were working class families. And now this neighborhood, Astoria in Queens, it has shifted so much where the income level has changed. A working class family can't afford to live in most of the properties in Astoria and similar neighborhoods, throughout New York City. And unfortunately, the rent laws that are changing, though in appearance they might seem to be helping the working class to maintain this affordable housing. I think that it's actually doing the opposite, and it's unfortunate to see both as a landlord, but also as a New Yorker as well.
how do you feel about those affordable housing lotteries? Do you think those actually make sense for working class? Do you think they make sense for the investors and the developers who put them up?
No, because a lot of these affordable housing, the actual income threshold that meets that standard is significantly high. And I think for someone who doesn't live in New York City and they hear that sometimes $120,000 income or $140,000 income is someone that would meet affordable housing requirements, they might be blown away.
Yeah.
But granted, part of that is based on the cost of living and it's based on the demographics in the area in which they're developing. I think a lot of the laws that we see being passed, there's an influence or an impact to some of the larger players in town, the larger developers, the larger property owners. But rent stabilized market has historically been kind of like a small business owner, right? It's people like my parents that this was their retirement. And if you look back in the 80s and even the early 90s, say three-quarters of rent stabilized properties were owned by single operators, or maybe they had two small properties. Now, if you look at the landscape, I mean, Carlyle Group, for instance, bought $500 million worth of small rent stabilized properties. We're not talking about 40, 50, 100 units. We're talking about 6 units, 8 units. So they obviously have different means, and other companies like that, to from legal standpoint, from being able to hold apartments and keep them empty, right, until laws change. And it's very different, and it's so again, it's impacting both the landlord, but also the people that live in these buildings as well.
A company like that actually might have insights into the political landscape as to what is supposed to change.
I think they have insights, but I think, part of, I'll give you an example of some other changes that are happening even outside of just the economics, right? Because we just focus on what the rent is. But at the end of the day, these are people's homes, right? So my parents, like I said, they owned their property for a long time, and they built a home for not just for us, but for the tenants that were living in the building. And my father passed away 9 years ago, and we had tenants that had lived in the building years before he had passed, that
Mhm.
came to his wake, that came to see us. We developed a relationship. My mom turned 80 a few years ago, and we had some former tenants actually attend her 80th birthday party. You don't see that anymore because, unfortunately, as things become more corporate in this asset class, it's just cold. It's business, right?
Mhm.
It's not a community anymore.
Yeah. But it comes with the size, the deal size. Like, you need to be almost more corporate to be able to make sense of those assets. Like, if I think
Sure.
about the different apartments that I had over time in New York City, I mean, I started sharing maybe a floor inside a brownstone, and then it was obviously it was just a landlord that I could shake hand with and have dinner with, you know.
Sure.
But then when I moved to Manhattan and then became more corporate, and it was different kind of asset class overall that was rented to me. So it eventually comes with the size of the deals.
Sure, but the players that used to play in the larger deals are now playing in the smaller markets, the smaller deals, the
Yeah.
6 units. A 6 unit building, to hear of a multi-billion-dollar firm buying a 6 unit building was unheard of, right? It doesn't make sense in terms of operating such a small property. But that, and I think that you see some of the impacts during COVID as well, where we had tenants that either they lost their job or there was some economic issues for them not to be able to meet the rent. We take a human
Yeah.
approach where we speak to them first, get an understanding of their situation, and we work something out, right? A larger corporation, there's no one to speak to, right? It's just cut and dry. And that's what's being impacted. And these rent laws are forcing the small operators to not be able to sustain these properties anymore, at the costs that are incurred, right? The taxes are up, all the utilities are up, the cost to repair is up. These are old buildings, right? A lot of them are 100 years old. That wear and tear has to be maintained. If you're not allowed to keep the income up along with inflation and these inflated costs, then a small operator has to, dispose of their property, unfortunately. And the only people that can really acquire it are the larger ones.
Yeah. We've actually seen a couple of those lately. Like we've seen deals hit the market for like land value or below.
Yeah, it's really it's as scary as an owner of rent stabilized property, right? Obviously, a lot of our assets have depreciated in value significantly. Fortunately, we have been very conservative, and I think partly it's because, again, my partners and I, we come from immigrant families which were highly conservative in terms of taking on debt. But for those that have higher debt ratios, or LT, they went in with a higher LTV, they're struggling. They're forced to dispose of the asset at a huge loss, and that's what we're seeing right now.
So, but as a community of operators and owners, what does it take to maybe make sense of that? And by that, I mean speaking to the political class that actually can change that. Like, I mean, it's, it's not a few operators and owners. So it's a larger group of people that are impacted by that. And
Sure.
eventually it trickles down. Like, it's the people living in those units who will live in horrible conditions eventually. Like, if something sells for below land value, then nobody will
Of
take
course.
care of that asset, which means that people will have horrific housing conditions.
Of course, no, I think some support has to be had, and I think some consideration also in terms of who's the owner, right? What because it's really very there's a disparity between certain owners that have many more resources and those that don't, right? But assessed values, right, need to also be recalculated based on the market, right? Our taxes are based according to the assessed value, but the assessed value is not proportionate to where the values are. If you're seeing rent stabilized buildings being sold at 40, 50% discount, well, then the assessed value has to change as well, right? And that's not happening. It's things like that where we can provide a little aid to the owners so that there's more cash to fix things. It's very hard to find an owner, and I think that sometimes there's this misconception or this perceived social media perception of what a landlord is and how they are, and but most operators, most owners, they want a good property, they want to fix a property, they want to provide a good home for their tenants, because there's no benefit to them to not, I think, provide quality unit, a quality building for their tenants, right? It just adds value to them even financially, right? To have a
Yeah.
better
Yeah, like
maintained
nobody
property.
actually wants to be the slumlord. It's like if you want to have the financial room to provide clean
No,
housing, and you also want tenants who are attracted to clean housing because those
sure.
tend to be the better tenants. Like,
Sure. I think it's very ironic. I was reading an article yesterday or this morning on The Real Deal. The New York City Housing Authority, right, which is the largest affordable housing provider in New York, for them to renovate an apartment, a full gut renovation,
it's
it costs
crazy.
them on average $325,000. So how can when you have that data as New York City in terms of the cost that you incur to renovate an apartment, but yet you're only allowing now with the revised law that just was passed this past week up to $30,000 to be for landlords to be able to have $30,000 passed on to increase their income. How can you fix an apartment with $30,000, especially with all the additional requirements that we have? Just lead paint, right? For instance, it can cost anywhere up to 70, 80, $90,000 if you have had a tenant there for a long period of time. So those that data does not make sense, right? When the city has and the state has this data, they need to really view it from a reasonable perspective as opposed to a political perspective. But of course, um, votes count and votes are important. And what's more sensational might attract more votes as opposed to something appears to
Mm.
be that you're favoring
And
wealthy
this is,
landlords.
I find this very interesting because it's an ongoing and probably ever ongoing. Like, we're not talking decades, we're probably talking hundreds of years, millennia, that there is, yes, there is people who have more wealth, but especially in the US, like, your parents were hardworking, and 88% of millionaires in the United States didn't
Mhm.
inherit it. So it's like it's people working hard and making different actions. They might educate themselves differently and they make different choices. And what I found is that most people are not evil in any way. You know, they're trying to make sense of the landscape that they're operating in. They're trying to make sense of the opportunities that they have at hand.
Sure,
And they're trying to do right by people, but it's based on incentive. And the interesting thing, election incentive
of
is
course.
to make promises. And the interesting thing is most good policies take more than one election cycle to actually play out well. So you don't really get reelected for
Mhm.
implementing the right thing to do. You only get reelected for kind of the publicity things you do.
Of course, because just like in life, right? I think the challenge is people expect instant results, but most things are earned and created over a long period of time, right? So a politician who's in office for 4 years is something that they might enact that might be a little bit questionable, might not benefit them when they're running for their second term, right? And then the impact or the result might happen 8 years from now, where
Yeah.
another politician might take credit for that return. So unfortunately, it's often we that pay the price for short-term incentivized goals, but we're not you know focused on the long-term solutions that would really benefit
Yeah.
the whole.
So, what are some of those mindsets that you think were really valuable on your financial journey? That, and I assume, given that your parents had such an influence on hard work, being conservative, being diligent, that a lot of it came from your
Sure,
upbringing.
sure. I think patience, realizing again, it, nothing is achieved overnight. They always instilled in me that you need to work hard. For me, it was always go to school, get an education, which is something that they weren't provided the opportunity to have. Do well in school, go to college, get a good job, right? A good job. And for them that was their path for my success. And so I was very motivated to not only um, meet their expectations. But I think I always saw the value of working hard. Right? Nothing is achieved um, without putting in the effort. And you want to lose weight, you want to get stronger, you have to put the effort in the gym, right? Um, and I think that always stuck in my mind that you always have to keep going forward, even when life trips you and you take a step back. Still having that mindset to keep persevering and moving forward. So that's helped me out a lot in my life.
Yeah. And what were they able to convey to you on like financial education? Was there something that was spoken to you at the table at home, or
Sure. So I think two things. One, my parents were very frugal, so they saved a lot, and so one thing was spending money or using your money for things that really are worth it. They didn't buy expensive things. And the one thing that they would spend their money on for us, though, was traveling. We would go back to Europe to visit our family. We would take trips. And I think that became something that was very important to me, the whole traveling experience. And it's something that I look forward to doing with my family as well, because I think you learn so much from your experiences, from meeting different people and seeing different cultures, but also that you're not limited to just the work that you do. Again, my father, his salary was not a very high salary in an ironworking shop, and my mom was a cleaning lady. But I saw the value of investing that money, putting that money to work, right? And over time, when we were younger, they didn't have much money. Even the building, when they bought it, the rents were so low and it was very old. But my father was fortunately very handy and he fixed a lot of it on his own. And 15 years, 20 years after owning the property, we started to see a lot of the results. And they lived a very good and comfortable life. And to me, I think they're the most successful people that I've ever met because they came from so little. And to have come here with no family, not speaking English, no money, and to have achieved what they had, I just can't even fathom it. It's just not comprehensible to me.
yeah, it seems like our parents' generation was so much tougher than us, no?
And I think it's interesting also, and I've spoken to some younger people, and I went to college when there wasn't any really social media, right? There was no Instagram, Facebook was brand new, and I think that's a big challenge now is that the short term, you know, goals that people have, I think, are also impacted by this social media influence, right? You see the results sometimes, which some are true and some are not, some are fabricated, but no one puts in the videos or post the videos of the failures, right? Of all the hard work it took to get and
Mhm.
achieve that result. And I think sometimes the younger and older generations don't really appreciate the effort that you need to put in, right? And I think that I was very fortunate to have grown up when I grew up, and again, that coupled with my parents' philosophy of working hard has allowed me to be in the position that I'm in right now.
Yeah, that I think there's like this. this instant, and Simon Sinek speaks about it, where people join a corporate and within 6 months they feel like, oh, I'm not making a difference, I'm like not having it. Well,
Sure.
you haven't done anything, it's like
Sure.
you just learned the ropes here, and
I
people
agree.
feel like it should happen overnight because they hear of the next
Agree.
crypto scheme or whatever is going on, and somebody
Yeah,
made it. Made, what does that even mean, made it? Like, if you just hit a pot of gold and you don't know how you made it, you're just as scared to lose it. Like, because you haven't actually
of course.
built the skill set or the perseverance or the patience to do it again.
No, I agree. I agree. And I think that to your point from earlier, where so many millionaires are first time millionaires, right? They didn't come from generational wealth. I think that's also because you have to work for it, right? There's a different work ethic, there's a different hunger, there's a different desire. Whereas when you're handed something, sometimes you don't put in that effort or even understand or appreciate the effort that's needed to not only maintain, but grow something. And I think another point too is like I listen to Gary Vee a lot. I like
Yeah, I
a lot of his viewpoints. And something that hits me with him is a 40-year-old sometimes might think that they're too late in the game to be able to achieve something. And he's like, 40 is so young. He goes, we have this concept that at 28 you need to be successful because you see all these other people, achieving this success. But really, I think that we need to also set the right expectations for ourselves as to, you know, the things that we want to
yeah.
achieve at certain ages.
So the average age of a billionaire is 67 years. But on social
Yeah,
media, we get that idea that everybody should be the next Zuck and like
of
have a
course.
$1 billion in net worth and a multi-billion-dollar
Yep.
company at age 30.
Yeah. Look, even I see it on the real estate end, right? I started slow. I actually, I stayed living at home when up until I was 26, which is atypical here, right? But for me, I was working in public accounting. I started my career at KPMG. I was working about 100 hours a week at times, right? So there was no point for me in my head to rent an apartment. If I'm at work the entire
Like,
time, I figured I'd save my money and I wanted to buy some. So I started at 26. I purchased my first property, right? But now, fast forward, I'm 42. And the same goes for my partners. We've doubled the asset value of our portfolio in the past 3 years,
yeah.
right? And I think that it's the beginning that's so hard. It takes such a long time, but then it's so easy to start, not easy, but it's much easier to start compounding that wealth. And I think
Yeah.
that that's something that is not taught or expressed.
I mean, the compounding curve in general, I think it's hard for a human brain to relate to that. N- And I'm going to pull one up
Sure.
here right now because it's so much work in the beginning that you cannot even wrap, wrap your head around. It's showing up. Yeah, here. You have this curve here where the incremental work in the beginning looks almost like less than what you get. But then once it starts compounding, and it's, as you said, once you're at the later stage here, asset value double.
Of
It
course.
seems like in no time, and that's where it's like it's a kind of growth. But you have to do all the work to build the pipeline first, like you,
Yep.
and that could easily be 5 to 10 years.
Sure.
And I think what is the hard part there is not to get
Sure.
distracted. And what you said, you're lucky you weren't born in a social media age.
Sure.
uh, People weren't waving new ideas and new golden shiny objects in front of you every day. You were like, okay, I'm going to dedicate myself to the grade. I'm like a CPA. I'm going to make this money and then I'm going to buy my first property. And maybe occasionally somebody that you know would
Yep.
mention an idea, but you were so deep into your work and your focus, it wouldn't distract you. So you just stayed on the track and did the path. But today it's like, okay, this is a good idea. This is a good idea. This is a good idea. New crypto scheme here, Tesla is a new quarterly earnings, this, and you hear everything about it every minute of the day. In
Sure.
fact, you might have a smartwatch which keeps blinking, so your brain never gets into stable mode.
Sure. I think between the distractions and between understanding, there's so many experts now, right? And sources of information, it's hard to understand which source of information is actually a good source of information for you and which one isn't, right? And I think that it's just hard for anyone to really assess, the value of that source. It's complicated. It's hard right now. It's hard for us too, right? It impacts me, of course, now as well, though fortunately at the beginning of my path I didn't have those challenges that other people are facing right now.
How do you assess what's good information for you?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, keeping an open mind first. I think growing up in New York in the 80s and 90s too, we were born to be a little bit skeptical, and have a little bit of street sense, if you want to say.
Yeah.
And then of course I was an auditor, so there's always that professional skepticism as well. So I take things with a little bit of skepticism at first, but then I look at also who else is following them. If it's someone that I value their opinion and their thoughts, and already that I've already established a sense of confidence in, and then I slowly warm up to it and try to keep an open mind, but also assess the information that they're providing. Right? I think it's healthy to get diverse opinions when you're so close-minded and you just focus on a certain type of source of information from a particular industry or group or whatnot. You're never going to open your mind and be a little bit more creative, right? You're never going to expand and grow. I've learned a lot of that from my wife as well. We come from different industries and careers, and she's definitely allowed me to open up my mind as well. We always have to be willing to learn, right, and willing to grow. And I think that the day that you stop, that is the day that you just you're putting yourself in a predicament.
Hmm. So how does she help you to grow? Like where does she challenge your auditor skeptic?
So she definitely has softer skills. My wife is super intelligent. She's a speech therapist. She works with autistic children, very patient. I think that sometimes in business or in real estate, you get so focused on the capitalistic side of things, right? Building a business, growing, becoming financially successful. And then you forget sometimes the other more important things in life, right? And I think my wife, and then also my father's illness, allowed me to really understand sometimes the true importance of life, right? It's the people. It's the time you spend with people. We're very fortunate that we're born healthy, right? If you're born healthy and you're born in an environment with parents that care for you, non-abusive environment, right? If you're providing education, all these things that sometimes we take for granted. And I think it's a reaffirmation for me that I've been very blessed in my life. I've been very fortunate in my life. And my wife continuously, indirectly reaffirms that for me. So I take each day with a little bit greater sense of appreciation. And I think that when you face your challenges, when you hit that roadblock, you realize sometimes what you thought might be such a big problem is really, in the grand scheme of things, it's insignificant.
Hmm. There's like statistics, and Gary Vee speaks about that a lot. Like just to be born human, just to actually be born is already like winning the lottery. And then, just being born healthy, you won another
Sure,
lottery. Being born in a
sure,
certain part of the world, you won another lottery. And then,
of course.
within that, like you just don't really have the authority in a way to feel miserable about. Like, what are you complaining
Yeah,
about? Life has never been more comfortable than it is today. So we should really,
yeah,
we should really be like, what are we complaining about? Like in the grand scheme of
yeah, of
humanity,
course.
it's the most comfortable life ever lived.
Of course. No, I completely agree.
Yeah. Usually I like to ask, what do you consider a life well lived? But to weigh this already encapsulated that question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are your plans for your real estate portfolio? What's next?
Sure. So I partnered, I have two partners. I've known them for over 20 years. They had invested in real estate with their family. So they're cousins. So between them and their siblings, they had invested in real estate and they had some other small businesses. We invested together collectively for the first time in 2016, which was the first time I've ever invested with someone else in real estate. And it was the first time they've invested with someone else. So it's kind of like a courting process from a business perspective. And what we found is that we help each other so much. Like each one of us has a different set of skills, a different perspective. We work. The three of us are very cohesive. And so we started to invest a little bit more together over time. And but it was always just amongst us. And this year we realized that we're leaving opportunities on the table. There's things that come across where you're limited from a cash flow perspective to be able to take advantage of. And we're also doing so much of this legwork. And I have a mentor of mine. He's a partner at KPMG that I've maintained a relationship with, and he's encouraged me over the past few years. He's like, you should start getting investors, outside investors. You guys know what you're doing. You're really good at what you do. Take advantage of that, and you're also going to help other people that can't do it on their own, right? They don't have the time, they don't have the know-how. So we've started this to syndicate now, and we're excited about it. But we're also, like I said, we're pretty conservative. So we want to make sure that we find the right investors, because I think it's important for us as much as it is important for them, right?
Hmm.
You know, for investors, my advice is always, find, if you're going to invest with someone, a syndicator or a sponsor or an asset manager that you can do your due diligence on, right? Find out their track history, find out who they are, find out what their risk appetite is, right? What are their goals? But vice versa, for us, it's not just about getting capital. We want to make sure that we're establishing long-term relationships. We understand their expectations, but also express our expectations so that we ensure that they're in sync. So we're excited about this. For us, it's new, but also I think that our backgrounds allow us to be able to do this in a very mitigated risk in terms of building this.
Hmm.
One, because of our experience in real estate, but also, for about 15 years, I was consulting and building infrastructures for businesses, from pharmaceutical manufacturing to my own businesses to a variety of other businesses, including real estate. And a big part of that is putting in processes and controls in place. So it works perfectly in line with our current plan. And one asset class that we're looking to invest in is self-storage facilities, which is not just real estate, but also the self-storage business component as well. And I think that our expertise in process and control allows us to really take advantage of that space. So we're very excited. It's a new field for us, but something that definitely has given us reinvigorated us.
Hmm. In my personal experience, a lot of the value in self storage comes. I mean, one is kind of location, price, but it's also how digital can, like, how easy can I sign up and get into the unit
Sure.
without actually having to interact with anybody?
Yeah, our strategy is we're focusing more on the mom and pop. So again, we're based in New York. We're not looking to purchase anything in New York City because there's these large REITs that we don't feel that we can compete against.
Mm.
But we believe that there's a lot of opportunity outside of New York, in particular, mom and pops that are either looking to retire. Some of them don't have websites, or they haven't really upgraded their processes and systems. They make money, they're happy, but we know that we can come in and add a lot of value from the digital perspective, from adding new technology, adding convenience to the customers, which we think is a big part of the customer relationship experience. But then also from the process side, right? Having controls in place so things are smooth, that you minimize the errors, they're not getting overbilled. We keep on track of things. So we think that we have a great advantage and opportunity there, particularly with the focus that we have in the types of facilities we're looking at.
Hmm. You're competing a little bit with Nick Uber there.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, it's real estate. There's always competition, right?
Yeah.
But I also think that if you do things the right way, there's enough for everyone. You learn from each other as well, right?
Yeah. I think this is the beauty about real estate. Most of the folks I meet, they think there's definitely enough land and enough real estate for all of us to put bread on the table. It's like I
Sure.
meet very few people who are like scared that because someone else is doing the same asset class, or it's quite the opposite. It's like, and it's really refreshing also because in New York, especially, you feel like dog eat dog world. Everybody's like elbowing each other's way, and
Of
so.
course.
But then, even in real estate or in multifamily real estate, if you start speaking to people, there's a little bit more of support. There's more support for each other, more openness. And if you go
Sure.
outside of New York, even more so.
Yeah. Look, it's there's different types of personalities and characters in every profession, right? And I think that in real estate, there's certain people that keep things tight to their chest because they feel that everyone is a competitor. But I would personally think that sometimes, the most success is had by sharing ideas and collectively, right? If you find the right people, and when you find that right group of people, you become kind of co-mentors to each other, right? And it's just a win-win on both sides.
Yeah. It's like you said, if you have met sometimes you can fertilize ideas, you have matching skill sets where it just makes sense to think outside of your own box and involve other
Sure.
people and share this. I mean, this is what drew me to real estate too, is to go to conference where people are open and sharing and helpful. And I don't see that too much in other places.
No, I completely agree. I think that there's a very open community for the most part, right? In terms of people sharing ideas and thoughts and strategies. I think the beauty of real estate too is that as businesses change, as technology changes, as the use of real estate changes, right? As well. Like even self-storage, for instance, was not such a large industry before, but it's grown and changed significantly over the years. There's farmlands now that are covered in solar panels, right? You go
Hmm.
back 30 years ago, there were no solar panels there, right?
Yeah.
So real estate and the uses of real estate change, and that's what's exciting. It's not just the stagnant business.
So now you can put solar panels on top of your self storage.
Exactly.
And sometimes I wonder why not every parking lot is covered with solar panels. Like, I mean, we should be at a point of efficiency with solar where that math works. I wonder what's the bottleneck there.
I think sometimes, capital, right? There's some capital that's required, or sometimes people are just used to doing things the way that they're used to doing. I think, when you've been in real estate for a while, you see sometimes some assets that are being sold. And for you, that's a no-brainer because you're going in with this concept of, well, we can do X, Y, and Z. Why haven't they done it? But then again, when you look at your own home, right, there's certain projects that you pushed aside for a month that becomes a year, that becomes 2 years.
Mm.
I think it's human nature sometimes.
True. And this is also something sometimes you're like, oh, where's the next deal? The reality is there is a baby boomer couple that's about to retire and they might just want to cash out, or
Sure,
there's somebody in their life cycle or in their investment cycle who have a different plan now. Or
sure.
there's
Yeah,
there's properties coming to market because maybe the father died and the three kids don't want nothing to do with it. So they're motivated sellers.
yeah, and we see that a lot. And I think that, you know, for us, that's where we see our opportunity too, is some of the, like you said, the baby boomers that are looking to retire. They're older. They're looking to spend their time in a different way. Um, and I think that sometimes the opportunity is not just the dollar amount. Obviously everyone wants to sell at the highest price, but for some of them, it's more about finding the right buyer who's
Hmm.
going to maintain my property because it services the community that I'm still a part of. And I think that that's something that we try to convey as well. We're a family run business. We try to treat everyone with respect. We try to do the right thing all the time. And that's something that we like to convey to the people that we're working with, because especially as we're targeting mom and pops in local communities, we want to be the right member of the community. Just like I said before about my community growing up, how it's changed, for me, community is so important that we want to make sure that we do the right thing as well, and that's conveyed to them. And I think it goes a long way, in your approach.
And it makes perfect sense because if I think of my parents and probably your parents, and they would shrink at the idea to sell out to institutional money just because there is
Oh
a
yeah,
premium on it. And it goes a long way that you build those relationships, and sometimes that might also mean willing to wait. You might start a conversation now and it might take another 2 years, take another 3 years, but because you're doing it for the right intention, you're willing to
sure.
build a relationship and wait and be patient, and they will remember that when it's time to sell.
Sure. And I think it's also based on your character, right? Certain people do things because they have a motive in place. But when you do the right things because you want to do the right thing, sometimes it pans out in your favor and sometimes it doesn't. But I think overall, you're going to get a return in one way or another. It could be economically, it could be just personally, right? Spiritually, whatever it is just do things the right way, do things the right thing. I think that it's something that we need to keep in focus, especially when we get into these business transactions that sometimes become a little bit more complex and stressful. It's just don't change yourself. Like maintain your morals, maintain your ethic, do the right thing, and I think it goes a long way.
Yeah, I agree. Since you mentioned, what does spiritual mean to you?
So I grew up with a very religious family. So from spiritual partly is, we grew up Catholic. We went to church every week. It was a big part of the way we grew up, and I still pray every day. And I think I'm also a believer of history. I like to think of myself as not a historian, but definitely someone that looks to learn on history. So I keep religion with an open mind, and I understand that the fallacies of human beings is not necessarily a portrayal of God itself, right? But for me, I think religion is definitely a strong part of my family's life. But I also think that there's a sense of spirituality with nature, especially in New York, where we are surrounded by buildings. We try to get out as much as possible and go for walks, go by the park, go hiking. I try to spend my summers in Europe visiting family, and my mom is from the Pyrenees Mountains, so we spend a lot of time out in the mountains. And I think that it's kind of like a timeout where you realize that you're such a small speck in this big world, and it's humbling. It's very humbling, and I think that we need a dosage of humble pie every so often to just realize like how small we are and how many things can impact us that we can't control. So you control what you can. You control what you read. You control what you do, how you treat people, the approach that you take. But it's a big world out there, and we have to appreciate it.
I like that last part, especially because sometimes what's happening in our psychology becomes bigger than the reality,
Oh, for sure,
and uh,
for sure.
and we have to gain perspective.
For sure. And I think that's why I've appreciated traveling and traveling. I try to travel to various countries. When your family's from particular countries, you tend to go back, obviously, to visit your family there. But I've been very fortunate to spend a lot of time visiting other countries and different cultures. And I think that you start to realize how so many people live such a different life. Their day to day is so different, their challenges are so different, their history is so different, right? And it for me, it's impacted me so greatly in terms of appreciating not myself, but then other cultures, other societies, other religions as well. And my wife and I went to Japan last year after we were married, and we really appreciated visiting the temples, right? And so many of the temples are in within it like a nature park, right? And it was very spiritual for us, even though we're both Christian. And it was such an appreciation of a different culture. And so it's something that, we're expecting a baby, our first baby in the end of May. And it's on the top of my list of things that I'd like to do with my future daughter is take her around and have her learn through experience. I think that that's going to be very valuable for her and for us.
Mhm. I think nature can play a big part in that. It's like the biggest mentor we have.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Carlo, thank you so much for making the time to be on the path to wealth. Where can people connect with you and Manas Equities?
Sure. You can find us on LinkedIn. I think that that's the easiest place, or manasequities.com. You can feel free to reach out. It's been a pleasure chatting with you as well, and I look forward to hopefully chatting with you again sometime in the future.
Thank you for joining us at the Path to Wealth. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Check out our upcoming guests and be sure to share it with all your friends and family that want to take their life to the next level of wealth.